Why did we not deliver? Why did we look incompetent? What did we get wrong that got us to that point? You can't be social liberal and social conservative. You can't be free market and social democrat statist. At some point you've got to choose at least some of these opinions. And so this is what we stand for. It's really difficult for failing institutions to look objectively at themselves and recover, and sometimes they don't succeed. We regard reform as like the kind of tenantry coming up the drive with pitchforks. They're suddenly getting above themselves and occupying territory that we should be in, and I don't think that's right. Nigel Farage's got a perfect right to go out there, build a party, advocate conservative ideas if he wants to. I never thought we could possibly win this election. It was only a question of how bad the defeat was going to be and whether we could do something. Labour won fair and square under the rules that existed, and we have got to learn the consequences from that.
Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe and like the video. And you can go to nickdixon.net for the full episodes of all our podcasts with our brilliant guests, get all my articles, early access to stuff, you can comment, and it's only £5 a month, which I've been saying is the price of about half a pint in London, but I've checked, and actually for £5 in London, they'll let you look at a glass of wine, then they just put it away again. So it's £5 a month, and it's even cheaper for the yearly option. So go to nickdixon.net for all that. And today we have another excellent guest. He is the Conservative peer, Lord Frost. Thanks so much for doing the show again, Damien.
Great to be here.
I didn't check if I should say anything in your intro. Was that good enough? Was that roughly what you're doing these days? So the last time you did the show was June 2023. And so now here we are in July 2024, just after the election. So I guess the obvious first question is, what went wrong for the Tories?
Well, I mean, almost everything went wrong, really.
We only have about an hour.
That's
so
the problem. I think I was probably feeling a bit more positive about things a year ago, but it was clear, I think, even then that we were getting the strategy wrong. We were tilting the wrong way, away from our kind of core supporters, traditional supporters, and in the wrong direction. And that just became more apparent over the last year. And then, of course, we messed up the campaign badly in various ways. So almost everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But I think the fundamental reason is we lost a sense of what we were trying to do as a party, who supported us, what we were there for. And that communicated itself, I think.
It must have been very frustrating for you because you were writing multiple articles about where you were going wrong. You were kind of like saying, guys, we're going to hit this iceberg. And they're like, no, that'll be fine. And it must have felt a bit like that. I mean, why did no one listen to you?
I think, it has been frustrating because this has been so obviously foreseeable for a long time, really since, I would say, last autumn, probably with the reshuffle, the re-importation of David Cameron and all that. That's the point at which it started to become obvious. I think people didn't listen because the PM, the people around him, the leadership of the party had chosen a different strategy, which was to take our core supporters for granted, not care about the coalition that won in 2019, the coalition of voters that Boris assembled, to not care about that, to sort of tilt back to our heartlands in southern England. And unfortunately, you don't win elections that way, and you particularly don't win elections when your heartlands in southern England are fed up with you for other reasons. So yes. It was a disastrous strategy, I think. And
you had an interesting analogy in one of your Telegraph pieces about the British strategy in Singapore in 1942, from memory. And it was about people getting dug into sort of the wrong way of thinking, but they just can't change course because they're in a comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly. It's drawn from a great book, which is quite old now, on the psychology of military incompetence, which dates from the mid-70s. Really interesting, and there's a lot more in it than my anecdote. But basically, he is arguing that there's a certain kind of military leader who prospers in peacetime, kind of likes the way the military system works, likes the kind of hierarchy and the lack of challenge, and gets, once they've got a plan, they like to stick to it. And there are so many examples of that happening in military history, where people discount contrary evidence. Singapore's one. I mean, the German invasion of France in 1940 is another. And I think we saw, something like it in this election, where it was clear the strategy wasn't working. Our vote was just melting away, really, in the first half of this year. And yet nobody wanted to change it. And maybe by then it was too late to change it. Maybe we were stuck. The whole strategy was wrong. It was too late to adjust, but it was wrong.
And where do you stand? I mean, I think I probably know, but where do you stand on this debate about what the specific problem was? So I saw someone quite aggressively questioning Jacob Rees-Mogg. I say aggressively, it was a spectator event, so about as aggressive as they get, but about this idea they should have moved to the centre, and Rees-Mogg completely rejected this and said, no, look at history, Thatcher, and he had various examples of Tory leaders winning by not moving to the centre, not moving to the left, but actually just sticking to principles. But this is the debate. Should you have moved to try and cut off the reform vote, or should you have gone further to the left to try and cut off Labour, I suppose? I mean, what's your take?
So I think ideally you don't get into that position, I think, is the first point, that it involves, when you're doing that, you're kind of accepting public opinion as set, and you've got a choice. Do you go right? Do you go left? You're kind of accepting that you can't change public opinion. Whereas a good government with its 5-year term ought to be trying to pull public opinion in its direction, moving the centre towards where you are, so that the policies you are trying to implement, you think are the best for the country, are attracting more and more people. But of course, if you get the strategy wrong, then that's not going to happen. We were left with this dilemma by the end that, we seemed to be trying to triangulate all the time, partly because our own party was so divided. Sometimes we'd tilt left, sometimes we'd tilt right, sometimes we'd just do nothing. And in the end, both sides just faded away. I think what you've got to do is have attractive ideas, conservative ideas, which are, you can convince people are the best ideas for the country and that people want to support. That's the best way of doing it. And now, sadly, we've got 5 years to work out how to do that a bit better next time.
Well, some people say at least 5 years, but I mean, I don't want to be too harsh on you, but I mean, and what do you think to the sort of related argument that some people say it was a competence issue, where some people say it's more of an ideological issue? I kept hearing this, some people just say, no, it's just that they're incompetent, they keep changing leaders, they're not governed properly, nothing's been achieved. And the other idea is, no, it's they've gone too far left and they've turned into a sort of green socialist party or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at this report come out over the weekend from UCL and this think tank, More in Common, where they ask people what was the problem with the Conservative government, and everybody says they're incompetent. That's the overwhelming reason why people disliked us. But of course, if you're a voter, you just see the incompetence. If you're a political strategist, that really isn't enough. You've got to go a few steps back and say, okay, why did we not deliver? Why did we look incompetent? What did we get wrong that got us to that point? Otherwise, it's a bit like, watching the England football team play, and everyone just says they just need to play better. Well, yeah, but you've got to dig into it a bit more deeply. And I think the real problem was we didn't deliver because we didn't have any agreement in the party about what we were trying to deliver. Therefore, we got caught in internal arguments about left v right the whole time, and it just sort of faded away.
So do you agree with Farage when he says that the Tory party is a broad church with no religion?
Yeah, I thought it was quite a good way of putting it, or maybe more than one religion. Maybe that's the problem. You've got to have a sense of core belief, and the problem at the moment is it feels to me like there's no opinion in British politics. You couldn't find somebody in the Conservative Party who could advocate it, and it just can't be like that. You can't be social liberal and social conservative. You can't be free market and social democrat statist. At some point you've got to choose at least some of these opinions, and so this is what we stand for. And the Conservative Party always has had quite a good sense, I think, until maybe 15-20 years ago, what it actually stood for. And since then, as part of the modernisation, we've just seen that get watered down. And people don't know what we stand for. You can't keep the party together unless the politicians themselves know what they want to do and why.
Yeah. And is there any particular leader in this leadership race that's coming up that you prefer, that you're prepared to say?
So not yet. I think I'm not just being kind of cagey about this. I think we haven't heard enough from any of the candidates really yet. The debate's only just getting going. For me, I want somebody who can stand up for what I regard as like normal, attractive conservative policies. So national independence, getting the state off the back of people and enterprise, standing up for our history, culture, defence, controlling the borders, law and order, having an effective government machine that isn't trapped in quangos and international treaties, all those sort of things, I think are core, like, conservative propositions and beliefs. And I want to hear some leadership campaigners talking about those things. And
is anyone doing that yet? That's another sneaky way of asking the same question.
I just think it's not really got going yet properly. I don't think the kind of personal attacks, attacks puts it too strongly, the in-passing comments about each other's, some of the other candidates don't help. But we've got to have an argument about the policies. We have to decide which ones are best and whether we're going to tilt left or right. And it seems the way this is going to come out is we're going to get a one nation candidate and we're going to get somebody from the right. That is an important decision.
And in case anyone viewing or listening doesn't know what you mean, there was a comment that Suella Braverman was having a public nervous breakdown that came out and things like that. So there's similar comments, and I suppose Suella Braverman's had some comments to say herself, although they've mainly been about Rishi rather than actual other leadership candidates, as far as I can tell, although I guess she's hit back at that to Kemi a little bit. So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. I'm a bit concerned about some of the candidates. It's basically Suella, Kemi, Priti Patel, and then there's people been talking about Tugendhat and Cleverly, and then there's Robert Jenrick even, who's kind of coming through as like a sort of, often it's a dark horse candidate with the Tories, isn't it? He seems someone who's actually quite serious about policy and immigration and things like that. Anyway, but you're not going to give particular names. I'm a little bit concerned when you say, though, it's too soon, because all the leaders are saying this, the potential leaders are saying it's a bit soon to be talking about this kind of thing. And I'm thinking, well, I just saw an article the other day that Labour need to think about 2029 already. So they're thinking about how can we win 2029, and maybe that's just their political strategists need something to do. But they seem to be very steely, and this new Starmer Labour is very much in the Blair mould of we need to win things, whereas the Tories are going, oh, what do we actually believe? I just think you've got to get serious at some point, right?
Oh, we have, definitely. But I think there is a bit of time. I personally think we should go for a slightly slow campaign, and if we have to have an interim leader, so be it. It feels to me like we can safely take 4 or 5 months from now. If we have somebody in during the autumn, that's fine. I'd rather do that than rush to pick the wrong person and find ourselves with somebody who just doesn't represent conservative ideas because we went at it too quickly. I think the public argument about policy is an important cathartic process. We've got to understand what went wrong and who was responsible if we're going to avoid these mistakes over and over again.
And do you have any sense that people have grasped this? Suella Braverman has said things like she's apologised on the election night, and she said we need to listen, and she's been very scathing about certain things that went wrong. Other people seem to have not grasped this. And if you go to the further extreme of the sort of wet side, you get the sort of Rory Stewart people saying the exact opposite conclusions to a sort of almost comical degree to me. So the question is, have they really grasped what went wrong? I'll give you another example. Ian Duncan-Smith was doing a show with Camilla Tominay. He was talking about immigration, and he seemed a little bit uncomfortable talking about it to me, and he said there was a problem with people undercutting wages and things like this. But that doesn't really get to the core problem of it. You got a bit closer in your article in The Telegraph about the multicultural society. There's a cultural issue that politicians almost find it impossible to address about immigration. So that's just one example. So do you think the Tories are able to actually really grasp what went wrong and be honest about it? Or is it just impossible in the kind of managerial, liberal type thinking we have?
It's a good question. We could take decisions that make it even worse. That is definitely true. We could just fail to get to grips with what the problems were and what people saw in us. It's really difficult for failing institutions to look objectively at themselves and recover, and sometimes they don't succeed. The Tory party's been around for 200 years, best part of. It has been incredibly successful at reinventing itself after these disasters. But there's nothing says it's always going to do it. And it's really important that we're honest with ourselves. And one thing I just worry how in touch we really are with what voters think. When I was going round associations in the sort of 6 months before the election and doing a bit of campaigning, it was obvious to me that a lot of MPs and candidates had no idea of the disaster that was about to overwhelm them. They couldn't sort of conceptualize it. They couldn't compute it. It was just outside their kind of frame of reference. And I don't think many Tories realise how unpopular we are. I don't think the solution to that is go around saying we're the nasty party all over again. But we've got to understand that the Tory party brand is really, really disliked and damaged in the country. And we need a bit of honesty and humility about it, how it got to that point. And that probably means some of the people who got us to that point can't really be the face of the party in future either. That's absolute bare minimum for this.
Yeah, like you say, and it must look very different on the doorstep to how it looks to you guys, because to me it's obvious. I see all the anger and I see the things people are angry about. But to go back to your football analogy, it's kind of like the fans watching going, why don't you play Cole Palmer? We always score when he comes on. But Southgate has his reasons that he won't, that we don't understand, that are mysterious. So there must be reasons within why it's much harder to do this stuff. Maybe it's just not feasibly for people's careers or whatever it is. But looking on as a layman on the outside, you go, yeah, immigration went way up instead of down. You look at the mess up with the leaders, not only the incompetence, but also the rejecting of the leader that people actually voted for. Then the members voted for another leader. They got rid of that person as well, and they brought in someone that no one voted for. And lo and behold, the public didn't like the person that they didn't vote for. It was completely obvious. So that's completely insane. And then on top of that, you have the arrogance, which I think you've talked about quite a lot regarding reform. This God-given right that we should the Tories seem to think that they have, we should vote for them. And then I suppose the one problem is, the reason it's so hard to figure out the next direction, I imagine, is because there is strong criticisms from the public from all sides. So there are people that are really angry about Partygate, but I wasn't really bothered about Partygate. I was angry about lockdowns, but I didn't care about Partygate. It was just a sort of, I knew everyone was messing around and not following the rules, and that's how I saw it. But then there's a strong anger about immigration on the other side. So that there is anger actually from the sort of competence side and the sort of corruption side. Then there's just anger from the ideological side. So you've almost got to choose which anger you address. But there's one of them that's going to remain. People are just going to still not like the Tories, right?
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, that's the problem we faced, obviously, that people were angry for all sorts of different reasons. And that's because we made so many different mistakes. And sometimes you just can't come back from that.
Yeah.
I think the positive thing that we've got to hold on to is, at least in my belief, conservative ideas are the best ideas for running a country by. And actually across Europe, there is a shift to the right around a lot of the world. People are running their economies on kind of free market, strong nation state principles, and they're being pretty successful about it. So we need to hold fast to the ideas that made the country and the party successful. We've got to kind of not reinvent the ideas. We've got to reinvent the way we present them and show that although they think they've got change with Labour, actually all you've got is more of the same. The real change would be to go back to proper conservative ideas, which we can be confident about, which succeed. But that's a big task because nobody's heard about free market ideas for the last 20 years. We've got such a terrible record on immigration and the sort of cultural wars, social cohesion and so on, that it takes a lot to get people to listen to us again on that. But those are the things we've got to do. all that pedagogical work of explaining how you run a country and how you make it successful. We've got to find a way of doing that in the next few years.
So you mentioned Europe there. Do you see the Conservatives as aligned with parties like IFD or National Rally or even Geert Wilders in Holland? Or do you see them as sort of a more right-wing European variant and you need to be something different to that?
So I think they're all quite different. There's quite a spectrum, I would say, of the so-called, hard right, populist right, whatever term one wants to use. I think some I would definitely feel uncomfortable with. Others, seem like fairly mainstream parties, like Meloni's party, for example. But I do think that quite often some of these so-called right parties in Europe actually have quite left-wing economic policies. And that is the trap that we've got to avoid falling into. It may well be, and a lot of people go around saying this, that the sweet spot in the British electorate is kind of right on culture, left on economics. And maybe if you go out in the street and ask people, that's kind of where the unsatisfied centre ground is. The problem is the left-wing economics isn't a good way to run a country. And if you try and do it, you end up failing. We've got to persuade people that right on culture and free market economics is the best way to go. But it's true that public opinion isn't there, and it's true that across Europe, I think partly because they haven't had the kind of catharsis of Brexit, they're still where we were a few years ago on some of these issues.
So you're sticking with your free market beliefs, but is it even possible when you have for example, a Bank of England and the general economic apparatus so against that kind of thinking, Liz Truss being the classic example? Of course, there's the idea that she just miscommunicated, but also her ideas, aren't they fundamentally at odds with the people that actually have to implement this stuff?
Well, I think we've got to a stage where there are not many people in the economic apparatus here or anywhere else, frankly, at the moment in the international institutions who really believe strongly in free market economics, who really believe in getting the state smaller and really believe that economic decisions are better when individual people and firms take them as opposed to when the government takes them. Everybody's been captured by this active state philosophy. I mean, not everybody, but that's the kind of mainstream centrist view about things. We need an industrial policy. The government knows best which industries are going to be successful in the future. Obviously, net zero and all that has hugely influenced that. So you're right, it's a problem. But all the same, I still think going down this path ends up with low growth, low productivity, low productive capacity. And that's what we're seeing across the West, because that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years in various ways. The idea we've been living in this kind of free market neoliberal world is just ridiculous. The state and the tax take is the biggest it's ever been, and the influence of the state over individuals' ordinary lives is the greatest it's ever been. And yet we're supposed to be living in this sort of free market, small state world. It just is not like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although it is a bit of an issue always, it seems to me, for Conservatives who don't believe in government, having to run a government, because I was listening to an interview with Steve Baker where he's like, well, I don't really believe in government. I was thinking, it could be a bit of a problem, because certainly Labour don't think like that. They very much believe in government and they're very happy to wield power. Do you think that's just a fundamental problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's like who said about the Republicans in the US that the Republicans say government doesn't work and then they get elected and prove it. I think that's
right.
that is the problem. But I don't think, from our starting point, I don't think it's probably not exactly what Steve was saying, but I don't think it's a sensible position to take. We're always going to have a significant size state in this country in any realistic world. If we could get public spending of the state down to a third of GDP, I would think that's amazing. That would be like massive progress to where we are now. But that would still imply a huge role for government, and Conservatives got to accept, I think, that's the way it is for now. The question is, what's the direction of travel, and are you freeing things up rather than broadening even further the scope of government? And that's the path we've been on.
Yeah, I think Dominic Frisby said, and I hate to misquote him, especially after I've just misquoted Steve Baker, but Dominic Frisby said to me something like, even under Thatcher, the tax code massively expanded. So the point is, actually, the state has never reduced under anyone. It always just gets bigger. Is that fair?
I mean, yeah, I think Thatcher, it shrunk somewhat towards the end of the Thatcher 10 years. I think it's the lowest it's been for some time, and the early Blair years when he was benefiting from the growth that we'd had. The Thatcher period and the Major period had generated. But it takes real effort to shrink it. And basically in modern democracies, the only way you shrink the state is by increasing growth so that it shrinks as a share of the economy over time. But of course, the problem is that increasing growth is best achieved by shrinking the size of the state. So you've got to try and explain this to people. We've got to begin the process of getting government off people's backs, allowing people to take their own decisions, getting growth going again, and then we will continue to have the money to pay for what we need, but the economy will keep growing.
And I didn't mean to get into this yet, but Labour, since you mentioned growth, Labour are obsessed with growth. That's all they're talking about since they've got in Rachel Reeves and so on. But presumably then you just don't believe in their programs for growth that any of them will work. But that's certainly what they've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about it all the time, and it's good. I mean, Liz Truss talked a lot about growth, and nobody seemed to like it very much then. So it's good that they're talking about it. I just don't think they have a set of policies or a philosophy that takes you to getting growth. I mean, it's obvious that tax and spend will go up under Labour, maybe not as much as they would like, but it will. They're going to massively regulate even more than we have. They talk about house building and infrastructure building. Well, good, but their target for house building is only what our target was, which we didn't quite meet. Maybe they'll meet it, I don't know, but that's not going to, I mean, if it's just the same targets before, that's not going to suddenly produce a sort of surge of new growth through the economy. It just isn't. And I don't think they really understand that sometimes you've just got to get off people's backs, that government telling everybody what to do doesn't work.
Yeah, regulation seems to be almost arguably the biggest issue. I mean, because we can talk about competence, we can talk about the party being too wet, but there's also, sometimes I just think it's all about infrastructure, services. Because if you listen to people like Dominic Cummings, he's very much focused on that. And I was watching a talk with him, and Michael Gove chipped in with a question, and he was talking about fish discos. I don't know if you saw this. He said that when you're trying to build it was a nuclear power station, I can't remember which one it was, but he was saying there was a problem with, you need to cool it with water. And then the problem is it was drawing in fish, and they're going to be killed. So then there was these regulations where you have to produce music that pushes the fish away. So he's saying we've got a kind of fish boombox, or anti-fish boombox now we have to install. And the just as an example of absurd regulations. And he had another one involving cats and a house building where you had to have a heath that the cats had to go to. They had to go to this separate field, and how you'd get them to go to it, it was unclear. But it was just a couple of examples of absurd levels of regulation. And then Keir Starmer had an example in his chat he had with Tony Blair, one of their little cosy chats, but this one was at a conference. And Starmer said he was asking how long it would take to make a single onshore wind farm, and he was told 13 years. And it was a couple of years to build it, and then it was 5 years planning permission. Somehow there was another few years in there as well. And he's going, okay, we've got to get this down. So is the fundamental question, beyond even party politics, is it just how do you deal with this? I mean, Dominic Cummings talks about it's almost how long it takes to build 18 miles of dual carriageway, and he has all these comic sort of absurd examples. Is that the key problem?
I mean, it's a big part of the problem, and everybody has forgotten that the first 18 months or so of Boris's government, we did try and tackle these things. There was a planning bill which entered the Commons, which unfortunately we then junked after the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, we did have a thing called Project Speed, which was to try and eliminate exactly some of these kind of choke points in the planning process. This all got lost once Boris had gone, and we descended into sort of do-nothing conservatism. But we did try and do it. And if Labour can really tackle some of those things, then, good luck to them. They need tackling. The country needs more houses. I mean, I get frustrated when everyone uses the example of onshore wind or solar, of course, because I think that's actively damaging to our energy infrastructure. It does no good to have more onshore wind at the moment. It does no good to have more offshore wind at the moment either. So if we're driving through new planning processes just to do that, we sort of feel good about ourselves, but it doesn't actually do any good to the economy. We need to use them to build roads, power stations, houses, the things that people actually need, and generate wealth.
Yeah. Okay, I agree, but I'm worried about not getting onto some of the key questions before you go. So I do want to get onto because we're already sort of halfway through. So I definitely want to get onto reform. It's going to be a slight left turn, but or right turn. But how do you think the Conservatives deal with reform then? Do you see them as a serious party, or do you just see them as a kind of pressure group making some noise and causing a bit of chaos for you in the election?
My assessment is I haven't really talked to people involved in reform very much, but my view is they're kind of on that trajectory. They're kind of moving from being a protest party, a kind of pressure group, and are capable, definitely, of becoming a serious party one day. But at the moment, they haven't got an organisation. They haven't got many councillors. They don't have a regional infrastructure. You need all those things to get people to come out and vote and get some perception of what you stand for. And I think they know that. They've got a plan to build that up over the next couple of years, as far as I can tell. So I think they're on that trajectory, and whether they become a major right-wing party is very much in the Conservatives' hands. I think whether we allow them the space to keep people supporting them, and whether we give them any competition for right-wing Conservative ideas or not.
Would you ever go across to reform? Is that crazy?
I mean, I don't think so, no. I mean, I think that the only circumstance where I could consider it would be like if the Conservative Party had entirely given up as a centre-right party, had tilted so far to the centre that the entire right-wing space, the entire sort of 30-40% of voters that you need to win an election, we just kind of abandoned them and we're just competing for the rest and the centre. I don't think that's very likely to happen. I think we need to, we are still the party with an organisation. We're still the party that runs at least some councils and have police commissioners and this sort of thing. We've still got MPs. We've still got an organisation. What we don't have is a serious Conservative policy, and we can get that. And if we get that, then we take the raison d'etre of reform away.
And where do you stand on Nigel Farage entering the Conservative Party? I mean, it seems unlikely that it would literally happen now, but Suella Braverman has spoken very positively about Farage, whereas Kemi Badenoch has been very much like he shouldn't ever be in the party and distance herself. What's your take on the Farage question?
Well, I mean, obviously, as you say, it's really for him and what he wants to do and what his aspirations with reform are. I do think that it is not good. I mean, I think it's part of the tribalism we've got into. Like I said in one of my pieces, that we regard reform as like the kind of tenantry coming up the drive with pitchforks. They're suddenly getting above themselves and occupying territory that we should be in. And I don't think that's right. Nigel Farage's got a perfect right to go out there, build a party, advocate Conservative ideas if he wants to. And if we say we're not having anything to do with you, that doesn't seem to me to make sense unless we're going to have a serious plan to occupy the turf that he is on. And that is really the question that we've got to find the right answer to in the next 6 months or so.
Were you following any of these sort of online debate about the Tories and the 0 seats meme and things like that.
Yeah,
And that was interesting because you had Peter Hitchens saying vote tactically against Labour, even if that means voting for the Tories, who he's not keen on, to say the least. And you had other people saying we need to just vote reform and destroy the Tories. I mean, of course, you obviously don't think the Tories need to be destroyed, or you wouldn't be in them. Presumably, that would be mad. But did you have any take on any of that?
So I think, I mean, I never thought from the start of this year, I never thought we could possibly win this election. It was only a question of how bad the defeat was going to be and whether we could do something to kind of mitigate it. But all these questions of electoral tactics kind of seemed to me irrelevant for much of this year. It was obvious we're going to lose. The important thing, I wish we hadn't lost so badly, but since we have lost so badly, we've got to learn the lesson. We've got to realise that people don't like us very much, and things have got to change as a result of that. So, no, I don't think 0 seats would have been great, but I think, a serious defeat, and we've had a very serious defeat, the worst for 100 plus years, has got to be the moment for some rethinking. And if we don't rethink, if we're in this same position in 5 years' time, then do we really deserve to carry on as a party? I mean, that would just show that we've not really learned anything, to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what about the actual electoral system? Does that need reform, no pun intended, or are you very much first past the post is the best way?
I tend to think first past the post the best way. I don't really... I mean, I think every system's got the advantages of its disadvantages, if you see what I mean. That, PR systems tend to produce lots of parties who then negotiate with each other after an election, and often without paying much attention to what the voters actually wanted. It's possible in this election, I suppose, that, well, I'm not sure. If you add up the Tory and Reform votes, it's bigger than Labour. But then if you add up Labour, Green, Lib Dem, it's bigger again. So I think we'd still ended up with a centre-left coalition. I think the advantage of our system is it produces decisive results. And, what it's told the Conservative Party is that people don't like us and it was time for somebody else to have a go. And I think the electorate were probably right about that, given the point that we got to. And it's brutal, but it delivers clear messages. And historically, I think having a strong government that can act if it wishes to is, on balance, a better thing, probably.
But do you think Labour really do have a mandate, given that they got such a low percentage of votes, and there was that stat that 80% of the country didn't vote for them, and they got, 1% more than Corbyn in 2019 from memory, but less than Corbyn in 2017. So it wasn't this ringing endorsement. People are calling it the loveless landslide and things like this. Then there's another argument that that's the system, and, okay, there was a low turnout, but it is still a strong endorsement. Where do you stand on that?
I think it was a strong endorsement, to be honest. I think that there was obviously quite a lot of tactical voting. You can't really just look at the percentages and take them at face value, because the electoral system affects which party people go for. And clearly in lots of southern England, people went Lib Dems, who in a PR system might have gone Labour. I don't know, but it's certainly possible. So I don't think that you could really look at it like that. Our system gives decisive results. People gave a decisive result, and kind of end of story. Labour won fair and square under the rules that existed, and we have got to learn the consequences from that. Now, they've obviously got to be quite aware of the fact that a lot of their seats are still quite marginal. That would be the sensible conclusion for them to draw. But I don't think that illegitimises their victory. I think it just means they've got to be conscious that, rather as we did 5 years ago, they've got a bunch of people who maybe aren't totally natural supporters, and they've got to make sure they deliver politics for them. And it's always easier in government.
What do you think they will deliver? Because I know it's a big question. Because, I mean, obviously I don't have much hope for a Starmer government, but my only hope would be they actually do get some things done on infrastructure. They do, build some houses and some nuclear power stations, whatever it is, or, defence, things like this, that they actually sort some things out in a sort of pragmatic way. Meanwhile, they'll no doubt do some woke stuff, because I see the kind of Blair influence behind it. I see that Times article he wrote, and he basically says we need to put away wokeism. It's only one sentence, but it's like we need to not be vulnerable on woke. To me, that means the worst excesses of woke. He says a man is a man, a woman is a woman. He's very clear on that. And now we see Wes Streeting speaking out against puberty blockers. They're going to uphold the ban on those for under 18s or whatever it is, something like that. But you also see the Annalise Dodds type people in the party saying, when asked what a woman is, she says it depends on the context, which is hilarious. And then you have Zara Sultana saying the puberty blockers stance is wrong and they should be given out. So, Starmer's got these mad people he has to deal with. So my best hope would be at least there'd be some sort of Blair pragmatism. But even so, Blair still paved the way for a lot of this diversity, equity and inclusion stuff. On the Blair website now for the Blair Institute, it still says diversity is our strength, and you're like, this is all nonsense. So will Labour be very woke by stealth? Will they get some things built? Or will it just be a total dystopia where they ban my podcast and GB News? And I don't know, what do you think?
I mean, I do think there'll be lots of lots of pressures on them coming from all different directions. I don't think they'll find it. I think that on the woke issue, I think they probably will be able to hold the line that a man is a man and a woman is a woman. But I do anticipate more pressure on things like free speech generally, on our history, culture, that sort of thing. I think those are the areas where they'll just give lots of ground because that's what their supporters like, and they'll have to give something. And I think this will be the area. I mean, I think the right thing for us to do on the right is to say, are they, if they are doing conservative-like things and getting results, we should be supportive of that, but we should also be pointing out that they're doing things that we should have done or would want to do. If they can reform the planning system, build more houses, good. We should have done that, and if we get in power again, we should do it again in a more liberal, free market way. So I think it's important that we don't just dig in and oppose everything for the sake of it. If some things work and the things that they use means that we would be comfortable with, then that is to be welcomed. I don't think that's going to be a very big area of things, but there'll be some.
I think I heard you say on another podcast you should sort of hold them to account by saying, that's a good idea, but do it more. Did you say that? Yeah, you should. Yeah, something
like that. I think, and I think that is reasonable, because we've got to win the argument for our ideas and doing things in a different way to the way they've always been done in this country for the last 20, 25 years. And if Labour either stumble or choose to do things that are consistent with that, we should be pointing that out, not saying you're getting it wrong because you're the Labour Party. There'll be more than enough things for us to criticise in what they do, that we shouldn't worry too much about giving the odd bit of credit if it helps the country.
Do you think one area they might be better on will be immigration? I mean, they couldn't be much worse. There's a sort of idea that, Tony Blair in that piece in the Times said they need to tackle immigration. Funnily enough, the solution was ID cards, which it always is to everything. If you ask Tony Blair to solve something, he'll say ID cards, which he's been saying for it. It's kind of hilarious. Yeah. And AI is his new one. ID cards and AI are going to solve everything. So I didn't quite see how that's going to solve immigration, but there is an idea. Certainly the NHS is one area they have way more leeway on, because they're not thought of as the nasty party, so they can privatise the NHS all they want and no one will notice and they'll say it's great. And Wes Streeting's basically admitted he's going to do that. Not privatise it, but he's certainly going to try and reform it by the sounds of it. And immigration might ironically be another where Labour could actually reduce numbers somehow, and they'll get away with it politically because they're Labour, and they know it has to be done to stave off the threat of reform. And they have people like Blair and Starmer who are very aware of these electoral threats in a way that the Tories didn't seem to be. That if you don't address this real issue of immigration, you will get spanked by people like Reform. So do you think things like that could actually come down on the Labour?
Yeah, I'd be surprised on immigration, I must say. I mean, we have not succeeded in getting it anywhere close to 100,000, let alone beneath it, for the last 14 years. And we at least notionally wanted to do that. Labour obviously just don't think it's important. Or rather, they may think it's important in some notional sense, but every time they're faced with a kind of concrete policy that goes in a different direction, they'll always accommodate that. And I would expect to see asylum seekers go up. I would expect them to take the easy route about importing more labour. Maybe we're going to get some further freedom of movement thing with the EU. Who knows? All those things. I think they just don't care, really. I just don't think they get that immigration is a problem for economic and for cultural, social cohesion reasons. So when the chips are down, I don't expect them really to do anything about it.
It's true, and they probably don't think it's enough of an electoral threat either. If they think the right is divided and reform aren't really going to affect them or similar parties, they probably think they can get away with more immigration. Yeah, that's quite worrying. Do you think there's anything in this idea, it's similar to what I've already asked, but Dr. Nima Parvini has a very interesting idea that the civil service and the whole governance apparatus is kind of a machine that's fingerprint operated, and it doesn't work when the Tories press it, but it only works when Labour press it. So do you just think, I've asked similar questions already, but do you think there's anything in that?
No, I do. I think this is their basic problem, that they think, I don't think they think there's really anything wrong with the way government works in this country, or the kind of general direction of travel, unless you're kind of kicking it in some other direction. They're basically sort of okay with that, and they think the main problem is that incompetent Tories and sort of nasty people.
All right, that is the end of the free episode, but if you want the full podcast, go to nickdixon.net for all the extra content, all my articles. That is my Substack, nickdixon.net, and we need your help to keep this whole thing going, keep the lights on, this amazing production, hiring people, etc. nickdixon.net to support us. It's £5 a month, which is about the cost of some sort of fancy latte in London, or as a slight discount if you get the yearly option, or it's just £5 a month. So we'll see you on nickdixon.net, and thank you very much.